I'm here today with Jack Huston on the farm, and I'm going to ask Jack a few questions about what he does here, but the gist of it is he's got a thermal drone, and we're going to fly the property, and he is going to give me a census of how many deer I've got to a certain level of accuracy, even the buck to doe ratio. Some of the distribution, obviously, of where the deer are located, because he can pinpoint on the map even where some of these deer are, well, where they are, basically, because he's getting a thermal image of the deer. And I know that you know, this is something that's going to be super valuable for me as I start really narrowing down, you know, how to manage this property. I think we're taking a guess. He's going to tell me how many deer are on here, but I'm guessing somewhere in the neighborhood of, you know, 65 to 75 on this farm, and we've got almost a square mile. So my density, I'm thinking, is somewhere in the, you know, 65 deer per square mile range. And I've hunted areas and owned areas that had way more than that. So, you know, I've talked about it, you know, a number of times on the show, you know, that we don't have tons of deer. This is a service that you do provide commercially. So if somebody wanted to contact you to do this on their property, how would they get a hold of you?
MissouriDroneDeerRecovery.com is our website. That's a great resource just to find out more of kind of what you didn't see on the video today. We're also on all social media, including YouTube, at Missouri Drone Deer Recovery.
So do you do recovery then too?
We do, yep.
So
yep.
What states is that legal in? Is it legal everywhere?
I know it's legal in Missouri. We're typically not outside of that area for recoveries. I don't know about Iowa. Okay. I know Illinois it's not. Ohio it's legal. It's kind of just scattered throughout the Midwest.
Yeah, and I don't know what it is here either. I mean, I've never attempted it. I do think it's probably not legal because there's all this thing about electronic means of pursuit. I think they would consider the drone as a means of pursuit, possibly. I don't know. We'd have to find somebody from the DNR to weigh in on that. But what all are we going to find out? Let's do that. I guess a little bit of you talking about how you do it and what we're going to learn. Most specifically, you have to fly the whole farm. Right? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. And you have a little bit of a downward looking angle, so you don't have to be border to border. You can kind of look ahead. So, you know, even though we have roughly a square mile, you don't have to fly every, you know, grid of a square mile, do you? Or how do you do it?
No, it's not too bad. I mean, we can cover a pretty wide angle there. We're searching at about 30 degrees most of the time on the drone. Only time we really need to change that is with cedars. But we'll just make a grid pattern across the property, not necessarily too tight.
Okay.
They should be pretty kind of grouped up right now. But
how long does it take you to fly something this size?
This should take us 4 hours.
Wow. I have to get a nap halfway through. That's a long. So do you have enough battery to do that all at once, or how do you do it?
Yeah, we have 5 batteries and then a generator we run to keep them going.
So. Wow, that's pretty crazy. What's the biggest you've ever flown?
I did 3,000 acres one day.
Really?
So a lot of it depends on how much cover there is, because
Yep.
open ground doesn't really count.
Yeah,
but.
Yeah. And ours is probably 80% cover, maybe 80+%. So a high percentage of that square mile is going to be timber. Not tons of cedar, so you're not going to be stuck having to fight through that. All right, well, without further ado, I'm going to let Jack get this thing up in the air, and then after we've flown this, we're going to come back and talk about the conclusions, some of the stuff that we learned, and then maybe some of the things that you've learned from other places that you've flown that are starting to show trends that, you know, as deer hunters and maybe deer managers, we can put to use. Dream Farm is brought to you by Whitetail Institute Food Plot Blends, Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail App, Hoyt Archery, Wildlife Farming, and PH Outdoors. Well, we've flown it, and we have a fair number of conclusions. Jack, I appreciate your time. This was really interesting. The technology was fascinating to me. The first time you targeted a hot spot and then you zoomed in 56x and we could tell whether it was a buck or a doe or a rabbit or a squirrel or a gobbler, or I mean, it was pretty crazy because we were looking for pedicles on the heads of those deer to see if they were bucks or does. So let's get to the conclusions. Overall, the density wasn't a whole lot different than I thought. It was probably right about there. I mean, we figured on my farm the density is about 70 deer per square mile, roughly. And then we had some overlap in the general neighborhood, and the overall neighborhood is probably going to be in about the 60 to 65, 60 deer per square mile is probably what this neighborhood is got, roughly. So it's more or less the same as my farm. My farm is probably a little bit more deer because of the fact that there's more food here, and we don't have the cows, so it's a little bit more of a attractive setting for the deer. So the buck to doe ratio is probably about 1-to-1. I mean, it wasn't a long ways off from that because some of the antlerless deer that we were counting were fawns.
Yep.
So just for the sake of argument, it's probably about 1-to-1, which I kind of thought it was going to be in that neighborhood. So if we look for more, direction from this, I think the main thing that I take away is that I want to keep my population about here for now. I don't want more deer. I've talked about it in a number of different episodes on the series. I don't want a pile of deer. The experiment is going to be to see if I can produce enough bucks with this density that we can keep them super healthy and grow them to full maturity and grow the best possible antlers, the greatest possible health. A lower density herd generally is going to be a healthier one, all things considered. And your data backs that up, right, with the places you've flown?
Absolutely, yeah.
So talk a little bit about some of the trends you've seen there.
Yeah, so most of the properties we've flown are in North Missouri, Southern Iowa, a little bit of Western Illinois. I generally say that's kind of the same habitat, same kind of agriculture to timber mix. And we found that once you get over, 130, 140 deer per square mile, you generally start to see, that's too many deer. Yeah. And that depends on how much ag and timber you have, and obviously if you do improvements. But we generally see that the less deer you have, the bigger, bucks you can grow.
The top end. It doesn't mean there's going to be 20 big ones. It means that your absolute top end is going to be higher, because you're not measuring the number of mature bucks or the size of, like the average mature buck. What you're looking at is like, what's the biggest deer that this area has produced? Then you compare that to volume or to density, right?
Yeah. We usually are looking at the top 1 or 2 bucks that area has produced in the last 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. And I think as you do more and more of this, I want to see how that data changes over time and what you learned, because there's always exceptions to every rule, and it's so hard to, we talked about it, it's so hard to come up with a hard, fast assessment of what that really means, where that line is, because you throw other factors in there like, the amount of hunting pressure, maybe sanctuaries nearby, et cetera, and you've got a lot of other factors to consider. But my goal, if I stated it over and over, is to see what we can do with a lower density, not fall victim to that deal where you have to see a whole bunch of deer to feel like you're hunting deer. And the experiment might not work. In the end, I may find that I have to produce more deer in order to have more bucks, so I can feed them out into the neighborhood, so that other people can shoot them and there'll still be enough bucks left to get a year older. That may be where we end up. But for now, I think it was, it was a good exercise to learn. And the other thing I thought was interesting was the distribution. We had a prevailing west wind, and almost all of our deer were on the downwind side of these ridges and points. We didn't hardly pick up any of them on the windward side, on the west facing slopes. They were all on the east facing and sometimes, north or south facing. So that kind of falls in line with what we've always said about, how they react to the wind direction when choosing where they bed. There was some larger concentrations, some bigger groups, and they were always does. and then there was some smaller bedding groups or whatever you want to call it, and they were usually bucks. So it's probably a little bit the time of the year, but they've started separating already. The bucks are hanging more together and the does are hanging more together. We think we found the Jordan buck, the legendary Jordan buck. He was right where I thought he would be, not too far from the buildings here, right above that cornfield down in the valley, the scrape tree. If we kill that deer next year, it's going to be right in that area. So we found one big bodied deer with big pedicles on that ridge that I was hoping that he would be on. Whether it was him or not, we don't know, but the neighbor found one of his sheds, so I know that he's still alive. At least he was at that time, so I'm guessing he still is. So that'll be fun to see, what that deer turns into. It's just kind of cool to get confirmation that if that was him, that he's bedding in the area where I thought he was. And you can learn a lot from trail cameras. I picked up a lot of information on that deer over the last couple seasons just from, taking trail camera pictures and looking at them. But okay, anything jump out at you, Jack? I mean, you've looked at a lot of properties. You were probably surprised at how low the density was, right?
Very surprised, yeah. Generally and you harvest does pretty, everyone that came in range this year, right?
Yeah.
But generally people aren't harvesting many does, and that's how those numbers balloon, at least in North Missouri and, that general area. But was surprised by the density, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, because I remember when I told you what I thought it was going to be, you kind of were questioning me that seemed awfully low. And my experience, we don't want to go too far off topic here, but I have actually hunted in areas with higher densities where they had done aerial surveys. So I knew very accurately how many deer were in those areas, and I knew what it felt like to hunt those spots. So I had a better sense of, what it's like to hunt an area with 150 deer per square mile, and what it's like to hunt an area with 30, and stuff like that. So I had maybe a little bit better frame of reference than a lot of people would have of, what the different densities actually feel like when you're in the woods. So yeah, very, very educational, very interesting. Jack, his service is available. Don't forget that. If you're looking either for, a downed deer that you haven't been able to recover in states where that's legal, or if you want to get the same kind of analysis on your property, Missouri
Drone Deer Recovery. A little bit of a tricky one, but
.com. Yeah, so check him out, and I really appreciate him spending the time here and going through the farm and kind of showing me what I've got here. Very, very cool information. So that's it for this week. We'll see you right back here again soon for the next episode of Dream Farm. And remember to always dream big.